Greetings, paper crafters. Karen Wyngaard here, and I am sharing the French Link Stitch Bound Journal today. The tutorial will include everything you see here. It's a beautiful journal with gorgeous inside pages and spacers, so you can really load it up with goodies. The unique part of this book is the French Link stitch. It's absolutely gorgeous. It just looks difficult though. It's actually quite easy once we take it step by step. It also features this beautiful book cloth on the cover, very unique, made by a company that's been doing book cloth since 1895. A very unique product, and I think you'll love working with it. So let's get started. The first step to this project is to trim the papers according to the diagrams in order to prep the inside pages. So if you take the first 6 sheets, everything in your packet is actually arranged just so. So it's in perfect order. So if you haven't taken anything out of the package yet, take those first 6 sheets. Those are considered to be the dark papers. And then we'll also need our book cloth cover out. We'll be trimming on that. So let's set the paper aside for a moment, and we are going to trim our book cloth down to 7 inches by 9 inches, so it'll easily wrap around the bookboard covers. We're just doing this so that we can get the trimmer out of the way. Once we're done with all of our trimming, then we won't need to pull it back out for anything. So first, you'll cut the book cloth vertically at 7 inches, and this cuts beautifully, just like paper. Then rotate horizontally and cut at 9. And you can keep those scraps for later. So once you've prepped those book cloth covers, you can just set those aside. The next step is to take each sheet of your dark papers, and I'm just going to start one at a time at first. And you need to find the grain direction. So I know this is kind of hard to see on camera, but if you rotate the paper, it'll actually want to fold and bend one direction. In this particular case, we want to cut each sheet so that the grain direction runs from top to bottom. So in other words, if I hold this paper up away from the trimmer, it wants to bend towards the trimmer. So if you place it in the trimmer in that position, you should have the grain direction running the correct way. So each of these 6 sheets are going to be trimmed in the same way. So starting with the first sheet with the grain direction again running top to bottom, our first cut is at 11 3/4. Then we'll slide it down to 7. Rotate the 7 by 12 horizontally and cut at 10. Now you're going to end up with a lot of different pieces, so it's important, in this case, a really handy tool is that accordion pocket file that works with your trimmer. So I'm just going to tuck this under the front edge of my trimmer, and that'll make it easier for me to sort the cut pieces. So in this particular case, I'm going to take the 7 by 10 that I just trimmed, and I'm going to put it in pocket 7/8, or the last pocket. And then right next to that, I'll take the 2 by 7 and stack that in the same pocket just next to it. I don't know if you can see how I'm doing that. Just filing those away. Next, take the 4 3/4 by 12 and cut horizontally at 5 1/4. The 5 1/4 piece will be rotated 1 turn so that it's vertical in the trimmer and cut at 4 1/4. That should give us 2 different size nesting mats. These will be filed in pocket 5 6 next to each other. We're just keeping each of those 4 cut pieces separate in our pockets. So then continue cutting those remaining 5 sheets in the same manner. So again, grain running top to bottom. And in this case, I'm going to grab 2 at a time just to save a little effort. Checking for grain direction, stacking and trimming according to the instructions. First cut 11 3/4, then 7. Rotate the 7 by 12 horizontally, cut at 10, and filing those 2 pieces with their friends in that back pocket 7/8. So 2 by 7 strip with a 2 by 7 strips and full size 7 by 10s together. Place the 4 3/4 by 12 horizontally in the trimmer and cut at 5 1/4. Rotate the 5 1/4 vertically and cut at 4 1/4. Those long narrow strips are just scraps, so you can leave those next to your blade. And we'll continue to cut the remaining pieces in the same exact manner according to your instructions. So at this point I have all of my dark papers trimmed and sorted according to the instructions. So now I'm going to take the next 12 sheets or 6 sheets. These are considered the light colored papers. So in this case we're going to trim and sort, but this time the cut is slightly different. So it's important to make note of that. So again, taking your first sheet, we still want the grain running top to bottom, so making sure that your grain is running the correct direction. This time our first cut is at 11 1/2. Then we'll slide it down to 7. Rotate the 7 by 12 horizontally, cut at 10. And the light colored pieces will be filed in pocket 3, 4, the first 2 pockets. So again, we're filing away the full size 7 by 10 and the 2 by 7 in pocket 3, 4, and then we'll file the remaining nesting matting pieces in pocket 1, 2. Now we take our 4 1/2 by 6, and this time we're going to cut at 6 1/2. And we just have the one cut this time. So then nest these mats in the first pocket. And we'll continue to cut and file these pieces using the light paper trimming formula. Once you've finished trimming all of your papers, be sure and lock your trimmer blade and then grab your accordion pocket file with all the sorted pieces because you wouldn't want those to tip over. So now you can see I have all of my dark papers filed in the back 2 pockets and all my light papers filed in the front 2 pockets. That just helps keep me organized. At this point, you can go ahead and take those pieces out, keeping them sorted by light, dark, and also by size. All of the nesting mats can actually be filed together by size. So if you grab all your dark mats in the 2 different sizes and all the light mats in 2 different sizes, you'll see that they all eventually will nest together. So these can now be set aside because we won't be working with those in the book assembly. So now that you have all your pieces sorted, still maintaining the light versus dark piles, you're going to take each of the 2 by 7 pieces and score them vertically one at a time at 1 inch. So keep the piles of light and dark paper separate, but we're scoring each of those vertically at 1. Once you've finished with the dark papers, repeat the same steps with the light colored 2 by 7 pieces. So score each vertically at 1 inch. And again, it's going to be important to maintain the separate piles for light papers versus dark papers. Next, we're going to take each of the 7 by 10s and we need to fold these horizontally in half. Now you could take the time to score and then fold, but there's a little trick here. So if you just take and use your score pal, the upper left corner, as a guide, you can actually just take each of these pages and lift up from the bottom and tuck toward the top, and then just one little crease and make these into a pile. This is just a slightly more efficient way to fold a larger number of inside pages, and it's just a tip I learned to save a little bit of time and effort. So I'm folding each of my dark colored inside pages horizontally so that they form a 5 by 7. Once you've got each of these just with a simple crease, you can then take your bone folding tool, stack them all together, and burnish them all at once. Again, if I took time to do each of these, score, then fold each, I'd be taking a lot more time to do such a simple task. So once I've got my dark colored papers folded in half, repeat with the light colored papers. Again, once all of the light papers are folded in half, we can take our bone folding tool when they're stacked and just really burnish those creases. At this point, you can also take and fold each of your spine spacers here and fold them vertically in half with the bump on the inside. And you'll do that with the dark colored papers, maintaining a separate pile from the light papers. Once you've done all the scoring and folding, you'll notice that you have 4 piles. You should have a pile for the light colored inside pages and the spacers, and then a separate pile for your dark colored inside pages as well as your dark spacers. Actually, before we get started with the piercing process, it's time to nest the pages together. This particular project has 12 different colored sheets of paper, and to make the book beautiful in the spine, like our sample here, you want to make sure each of the 12 colors is represented on the spine. So the process is going to be to take one light colored paper or one inside page from the light colored stack and nest it with one paper from the dark colored stack. It doesn't really matter what order you go in, just so that you're taking one light and nesting with a paper from the dark. And if you're putting the dark on the inside, be consistent with that process for all 6 signatures. So we're creating a signature that is a dark inside page inside of a light inside page. Now we need to do the opposite with the spacers. Again, because we want each color represented in the spine, it doesn't matter how you sort these, but because I put the dark on the inside of these pages, I want to make sure this time the dark is on the outside. So I'm going to grab one dark spacer and one light spacer this time. So again, dark on outside, something from the light pile on the inside. And repeat that until you have all of your signatures nested together. So now I should have 6 signatures of spacers and 6 signatures of inside pages. At this point, we can start the piercing process. Now, it's important when stitching a book to pre-pierce your pages, and for this purpose we have actually saved you a lot of time and measuring time to have this little stitching guide here, or piercing guide. Also, you'll want your piercing cradle as well as an awl to complete this process. So starting with one of the full-sized incised pages, you'll place that into the cradle, and then you can see on your piercing guide that you will align the top edge and the bottom edge with the top and bottom of your inside pages. Placing your awl down into the crease, you will pierce a hole everywhere you see one of those lines. So it's a total of 6 stitching holes that we're piercing into each one. And that'll make sure that the holes that are pierced are consistent. So at this point, to save a little time, you can nest several of these full-size inside pages together. I usually will do 2 sets at a time just to save a little effort, and transfer those 6 holes, stitching holes, into your spine. If you are nesting 2 sets of pages together, just don't forget to take them apart again before you add them to the stack. And repeat that with the remaining 7 by 10 inside pages. Once all of your inside page, the full-size pages are pre-pierced with your holes, you'll want to repeat that step with the spacers. So again, to save a little time and effort, you can stack two signatures together, align the top edge of the spacer and the bottom edge of the spacer with your pages, the top and bottom edge of the piercing guide, and pierce those. All 6 holes. And if you do nest them, don't forget to take the nesting signatures apart again before you add them to the stack. Repeat that with all 6 signatures, all 6 spacer signatures, excuse me. Once all of your piercing is completed, you can put those tools away and we'll get ready to start stitching the book. In preparation for stitching the book block together, you'll want to grab your twill. And I don't know if you know this or not, but in addition to paper having a grain direction, ribbon also has a grain direction. So we need to take this piece of twill and cut it so that it's cut into 2 equal-sized pieces. And then as we're preparing the book, it will be helpful to make sure that we place the twill in the correct grain direction. You should have a length of wax linen thread and a needle. Now carefully unwind your thread and thread it onto the needle. I like to run it through my hands just a little bit to warm up that waxy coating and smooth out any lumps that might exist. And then in order to thread the needle more easily, as I get older, I notice my eyes are getting older as well. So to help and aid in the threading of the needle, you can actually smash the end of the thread flat, which then should allow the needle to thread more easily through the eye. Now in this particular case, you'll want to make a nice long thread or nice long tail on the thread, but we do not double the thread. So if you, it's a very long length of thread, so go ahead and make a long tail, but as you are stitching your book, you'll want to make sure that you're never stitching a double layer of thread through your openings. To begin, choose one of the inside pages to be your inside front cover. So one signature of the full size pages is going to be your inside front cover. And use a piece of painter's tape or washi tape, and I just like to delint my clothes a little bit with it. This is low tack tape, but I like to be sure it's not going to tear my paper. So if you take a look at the spine where we did our stitching holes, you can see that there's 1, 2, 3 on the left, 1, 2, 3 on the right. So we're going to place one of our pieces of twill so that it lands between the second and third hole on the left, and just use that piece of painter's tape to secure it to the front of that signature. And again, this is where the grain direction of the ribbon or the twill is helpful. You want it so that it's bending towards the center of the book. And this is just going to act as an extra set of hands to hold the twill in place as we do our stitching. To begin the stitching process, we're going to go from the outside of the signature to the inside through that top hole, or the outermost hole here, from the outside to the inside. And we're going to pull the thread all the way through, and we want to leave about a 5-inch tail. How do I tell it's 5 inches? Well, this page folded in half is 5 by 7, so that's an easy way to tell. And if it helps, or if it's something that you want to keep out of your way as the thread goes, you can capture it right underneath a piece of painter's tape that you place down to hold the twill into place. So at this point, we're on the inside of the book. So we're going to go from the inside to the outside with the thread right next to the twill. So you can see we just came out that hole. Then we're going to stitch over the twill into the third hole. And just pulling that taut. Now we'll go from the inside to the outside again. Pulling that thread Again, over the twill into the 5th hole from the outside to the inside. So you can see I have 2 long stitches over those pieces of twill. Finally, we'll come out the bottom hole from the inside to the outside. And as I finish, when I get from one end of the signature to the other, I'd like to just gently check to make sure I don't have any slack on the threads on the inside of the book. That way you just kind of pull straight across by holding both ends taut. If you kind of tug up, you may tear the paper. So I find that just pulling straight across really helps. When you get to the end of a signature, you're going to close that signature and then grab a spacer signature. What we're doing is we're placing every other signature will be a spacer, and that's going to allow space in your book to add photos and embellishments, because when you have a fixed spine like this stitched spine, you don't want one end of the book to be chunky and expanding too far and stretching the spine. So when I add my new spacer signature, I'm going to stitch from the bottom hole to the adjacent hole, into the adjacent hole in the new signature or in the spacer. So you can see I've just got the tiniest little stitch there that connects the two. You can see that there. And then we're just going to repeat that in, out to work our way across the book. Now the French link, what makes that decorative stitch is capturing the thread of the previous stitch. So all I need to do is, now that I'm out my hole next to the twill, I'm just going to slide my needle underneath the stitch of the previous signature and pull. And you can see the threads are crossed, and that's the look we want to go for. It's not going to look like a whole lot at first, just like twisted threads. And then you're going to stitch over the twill like we did the first time, with the threads crisscrossed this time though, and stitch into the hole on the other side of the twill. Next we'll come out the 3rd hole from the inside to the outside, pulling that thread. And then again, because I'm over the twill, I need to capture the stitch of the previous signature with my needle and pull that taut. So again, every time I stitch over the twill now, I'm going to be crisscrossing those threads. You can see how the threads are twisted. Then over the twill into the 5th or the 2nd hole here from the left. And then finally, from the inside to the outside, you're going to be coming out the first stitching hole that we started with, and you should be right next to your original 5-inch tail. So then what you need to do is to permanently connect these two. We're going to tie those 2 ends of thread together. Again, just double checking for slack. So just make sure you don't have any by pulling all the way across. And then just double knot those 2 ends together. And then I'm just going to tuck this 5-inch tail thread back underneath that painter's tape to get it out of my way. And now that I'm at the other end, I'm going to close up my spacer signature and come in and add a full-size page signature. And it just tucks right up against the previous signature, making sure that your twill is on the outside, not squeezed in between. That's happened before. So just something to watch. Make sure your twill's on the outside. So again, to connect the new signature, all I'm going to do is stitch down into that adjacent hole in the new signature. So pull that all the way through. And again, it's just that tiny little connecting stitch. That's all you need. And then come out the 2nd hole next to the twill. Okay, and again, like I mentioned, to get that link stitch, you just need to capture the thread of only the previous signature. So it's probably kind of hard to see, but you have 2 threads there. You just want to capture the thread of just the previous signature, and you don't want to go through the twill itself. So just capture that, the leg. It's like a crisscross. You can see 2 legs. So just the leg of the signature, the previous signature, not both existing signatures already. So crossing the threads from the outside to the inside, over the top of the twill then, into that 3rd hole, lots of thread here. So you really won't see that pattern emerge until you've added a few more signatures. Come out the fifth hole, or excuse me, the fourth hole next to the twill. And I'll try to hold this real still. Again, 2 legs. You're just going to capture the leg with your needle of the thread from the previous signature only. And then pull that nice and taut and go over the twill into the fifth hole. And then you'll end up at the other end. So now that we've come out this other end, we don't have 2 tail threads to tie together. So in this case, we're going to create a kettle stitch. And by doing a kettle stitch, it just means to capture the previous thread or the little stitch, that little hop stitch that we used to add those first 2 signatures together. You're going to capture that with your needle and then pull that until you see a loop. So you can see my little loop there. Then you're going to pull the thread through the loop. So just pull it through. And then just tighten that up, and that is a kettle stitch. So as we work across the book now, adding new signatures, when you get to the end of a signature, you'll do a kettle stitch at each end. So next is a spacer signature. So close up that signature you were working on and add a spacer. And just stitch from the kettle stitch you just did into the hole of the adjacent spacer signature. And we're going to continue that in-out process, not forgetting to do our French link stitch as we get to the twill. So this is where I kind of mentioned that you want to make sure your twill is on the outside. It's especially an issue when you add a spacer signature just because it's so short. So come up the next hole. And again, I've got my signature from the previous stitch, just capturing that with my needle to twist the threads, and then stitching in the next hole over the top of the twill. And you'll continue that process, adding a kettle stitch at each signature end until you've stitched the entire book together. And to do the kettle stitch, just capturing the stitch from the previous 2 signatures, one that connects them, create a loop, and pull it through. And you can see now where I've doubled my thread, it's starting to get really close to where I'm stitching. So I'm just going to take a moment to shorten that tail, that thread tail, so that I'm never having a double thickness of thread going through my stitches. Now, as you're finishing up, as I mentioned earlier, you will be ending with a spacer signature, and that is absolutely fine because we do have a solution for that. So as we're just wrapping this up here, I'm adding that final spacer signature. And because I'm coming out an end, I need to do that kettle stitch as previously mentioned. So always ending with a kettle stitch. Now, because this is our very last signature that we're going to be adding, it's prettier on the spine if you end with the thread on the inside of the book. So now that we've done our kettle stitch on the outside, I'm going to push my needle back in through the same hole I just came out. And I'm going to do a kettle stitch on the inside. So basically all that means is I'm going to capture this first thread to create a loop, and then pull the needle through the loop, and I'm just going to pull this taut so that my knot ends up right over that hole. And then you can snip. That thread is not going anywhere. So that's the final signature. Now if I flip this over to the front side of the book, you'll remember this 5-inch tail we started with, and there was a reason for that. Again, like I mentioned, the spine is prettier if the thread is on the inside of the book rather than the outside. So we've left a 5-inch tail, and I'm going to smush this so it's easier to thread. So I'm going to take that 5-inch tail, place it on the needle, and just like we did at the back of the book, we're just going to go through that first hole, come to the inside, and then do a kettle stitch on the inside. So capture that long stitch, make a loop, and pull it through so that the knot ends up right over top of that stitching hole. Now both of my tails are on the inside of the book, in the front and in the back, and everything on the spine looks nice and tidy. Now that the stitching is done, it's time to wrap our bookboard covers. So set your book block aside and grab the two medium gray or dark gray book cloth covers out of your kit, as well as your 2 pieces of bookboard. So if you've wrapped books before, it's a very similar process, and the book cloth works very much like paper. It wraps just as beautifully. So in this case, we're going to spread glue. Sorry about that, gong. Spread glue onto the bookboard, and we've got our book cloth pretty side to the table and full coverage with the glue, and we're going to place that down, glue side to the book cloth. And we'll just quickly flip that over and work out any air bubbles with our fingers. Repeat with this second cover. And what's beautiful about this book cloth, it has a non-aqueous surface, which sounds like a really fancy word for your liquid adhesive will not bleed through the cloth. So you're able to use our bookbinding glue without worry of it bleeding through the surface. All right, at this point, one at a time, we're going to wrap the corners, and we need to cut them off at a 45-degree angle to get rid of some of that excess bulk, but you want to be sure and leave plenty of space between the corner of the bookboard and where you cut the cloth. It's better to leave too much than not enough. You can see here I've left about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. So trim all 4 corners at a 45-degree angle. And normally this is the point where we train the paper, but because the book cloth is so flexible and pliable, you can just go ahead and glue those 2 opposing flaps. So spread the glue onto the book cloth, making sure you get the entire surface of that down, and wrap. Just hold it for a few seconds to make sure you have good contact. And again, whenever I wrap bookboard covers, I like to do the opposing flaps first. It just, to me, gives it a much nicer finished look. Now you can see that I left a little bit of the book cloth in the corner. So to alleviate that, as you're placing that short flap, the glue on the short flap, you're just going to tuck those corners in. You can use your fingernail, you can use a bone folder, but you can see by flattening those corners you get really pretty edges. Nothing sticks out, and there's no bookboard exposed. If you need to add glue to the flap, just make sure you're adding it right up against the bookboard and then feathering that outward. Again, just pinching those corners down and then wrap. Once you've completed one cover, go ahead and repeat those exact steps with your second cover. Once your covers are fully wrapped, it's time to start prepping the book block for the covers. So take the painter's tape off the pieces of twill from the front, and if it does that, just snip it off. And that'll be covered up, so no worries about that. All right, so I'm going to remove the painter's tape, and now I want to glue this twill piece to the front inside cover. So remove the tape and then glue it into place. Okay, then flip the book over, And you'll see the twill is here as well. And again, we are on a spacer signature. So we're just going to trim those pieces of twill to the same length as that spacer and glue those as well. Now that we have both pieces of twill, or all 4 pieces of twill adhered, it's time to add the front cover. So in this particular case, you want to take a scrap piece of paper and slide it in just between the first and second page of the inside of the book. So I'm just placing that in there to protect the rest of my book block. Spread a nice coating of glue all over that front inside cover, or that first outside page. And go right over that twill to make sure that everything will connect at that point. Paying special attention to the spine area, because that is where your book will want to come apart. All right, add the cover. So grab one of the wrapped covers, and it's important that you place it down so that the edge of the book cover is flush with the spine. So I'm just going to press this over, flip it towards the table, and open up that book, and then pull out my scrap piece of paper. And you have just a few moments to make adjustments so that your inside cover or your inside page has about an even amount of exposure on those remaining 3 sides. So flush with the spine, and the remaining parts are even. So if you stand your book board or your book up like this, you can easily spend a little time burnishing that inside front cover into place, paying extra special attention to the spine, because this is where your book is going to want to come apart because of the stitching. So you can't spend too much time burnishing that into place. So if I flip this over, I'll show you what I mean. See how it wants to come apart right there at the spine? That's why we spend a little extra time right here while that glue sets up. So once our front cover is in place, you want to grab one of your largest nesting mats. Remember we cut those and tucked those away in the very beginning? So grab one of the largest, just one, largest nesting mat. And this is going to act as our inside back cover. So locate, we've just trimmed off the twill here and glued that down. So just open it up so you're just on that very first page of the spacer signature. And we're going to spread adhesive here on the mat itself, just on about 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch or so of that edge. And I'm going to dry fit this so you can see what I'm talking about. But once you've got the adhesive in place, you're going to place it into the inside back flap so that you've got about 1/8 inch exposed on all 3 sides. And then that, when you close everything up, will act as our inside back cover. So go ahead and spread adhesive just on one long edge of the one of those largest mats from your nesting mat stack, and glue that into place. And that solves the riddle of having an inside back cover. At this point now, we can repeat the steps that we did for the front cover by slipping in a piece of scratch paper just inside and then spreading glue here. Again, extra special attention near the spine edge, getting over that twill, and then coming in with your second wrapped cover, positioning it so the edge of the bookboard is flush with the edge of the spine, and again flipping the whole thing over so that I can take a look on the inside and make sure everything is spaced appropriately. And if you're worried about your book covers being flush, just take a moment to tap those into place before fully burnishing that inside back cover. Again, you can't spend too much time at that spine really burnishing the glue while it dries to make sure you've got good contact near the spine. And that is your beautiful book. Just look at that stitching. See how it just took a little time for that pattern in the French link, the twisted threads, for the pattern to emerge. Isn't that gorgeous? Now the remaining mats, nesting mats in your kit, are intended for you to add to the inside of your book. So those you can add at your leisure when you're ready to add photos. And then that can be transformed into a beautiful finished book. Here I added a You Are Here woodcut from our Sea Breeze collection, and just added a double mat here. And on the inside you can see I added my double mats to the inside pages along with some cut aparts from my stash. And it just makes a beautiful, beautiful book. And you can even add photos or cut aparts to those inside spacer pieces as something a little bit fun and different. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, the beauty of this book is it takes 12 sheets of paper to make those inside pages, and you just cut them according to the instructions. So you can actually take any of our page kits that make 8 pages, because they contain a dozen sheets of 12 by 12 paper, and you can transform those into one of these books using the French link stitch journal components kit, and use your choice of colors of different book cloth that we have available in the Pro Shop. So this one, in this particular case, I took the Daffodils kit and took those 12 sheets of paper, prints and plains, and I divided them in half. So each of you know how you get 2 sheets each of each sheet of paper, just divide those into 2 separate piles. So you'll cut half of those papers at the dark paper formula, and the other half at the light paper formula. That will give you the nesting mats and the inside pages and strips that you need. So you can see this one I made with Sea Breeze and just added a little frame wrapped in the washi tape. And all of the cut aparts in that page kit then, and all the embellishments, can be added to decorate and finish your book. It makes an amazing gift. This is one Trisha did with Steamworks. Isn't that beautiful? And the tags and all that can be very interactive. And it just makes a beautiful gift and holds 4x6 photos perfectly. So I hope you enjoyed this project and that you're tempted to make more with page kits. Thanks for joining us.